All right, good afternoon, everybody. Let me call this meeting of the Redevelopment Authority of the City of Oshkosh to order. Roll call, please.
Howard.
Here.
Belter. Birmingham.
Here.
Pintz.
Here.
Lasky.
Here.
Schneider.
Here.
Good, thank you. The first item on the agenda is our consent agenda, and that is for the approval of the minutes from the RDA meeting of November 19th, 2014, which were distributed to you both, I think, electronically and in our hard copy format. Anybody have any additions, corrections, or comments with respect to those? If not, I'll entertain a motion as to its as to their approval. So moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded that we approve the minutes as distributed. Those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Now, we can move on to new business, the first item of which is a public hearing, which I am now opening, with respect to the spot blight designation of 1402 Mount Vernon Street. Is there anybody in the audience today who's here to speak to that? Ma'am.
I'm actually from the Housing Authority. Sue Van Hollingen, the director of the Oshkosh Housing Authority. We're working, as many of you know, we had neighborhood stabilization funds that were awarded in 9 and 10. We spent well over the $1.2 million allocated to us. We have about $217,000 left in that account in Madison. I've talked to them. They said, you betcha you can use that for Mount Vernon if you get the spot blight. We desperately we're working with the Historic Society. We're working with some different levels of funding to take that south building and turn that into probably 50 public housing units. It will be mixed income, though. It won't be just public housing. It'll be a mix of public housing. As you know, we reduced the numbers at Court Tower from 157 to 104. We took 7 units out of Mainview. So I have 60 units of public housing I have to put back into the city of Oshkosh. So the plan is to use a portion of those. The original plan was 60. That's too tight. I'd like to make it more like 50 1- and 2-bedroom apartments for elderly and disabled. So this money would help toward that. We have a roof in that building that is not there anymore. It's gone. It collapsed. But we spent about $60,000 to at least stabilize the building, and it's open, but there'll be obviously more repair needed, but it's a blighted building. It's in bad shape, but it's stable enough that we think we can develop it into these apartments.
We just got a question. It could be a side issue, it may not be. You were going to develop or talked about developing, or I heard we're developing a relationship with the Christine Ann Center, and I thought, was that going to relate to these units?
No.
Or other units?
No, that's related to Cumberland Court. We're applying for, the application's due next week, Friday, for Cumberland Court for tax credits.
Okay, for the
But
tax credits on.
Well, it's
So
it's a collaboration with
separate.
Christine Ann to help them.
The $214,000 or $17,000 that you have left over obviously will help with this project, but what's the source of the remaining funds for it ultimately?
The remaining funds will be a mortgage on the property.
Okay.
It will also be the sale, hopefully we will get the historic designation, and the sale of the state and federal tax credits. We hope to apply to Federal Home Loan Bank for funding. Home funds home funds and public housing don't mix, so I take that back. Whatever source of funding we can, 4% bond through WIDA, bond financing. So whatever funds we can find. And we also are pretty sure we have a developer for the north building, a commercial entity that wants to come in to that building. So if we can get one going, the other one will get going also. So that whole block would be taken care of.
Any other questions for Sue?
And these buildings are in good enough condition that you can use them?
According to an architect and according to I'm going to get the wrong term, an engineer who did come out and look at it, because I was very concerned when a portion of the roof collapsed that it just wasn't worth it. And he said, "Oh no, you've got a beautiful base here." But the rest of it, I don't know who else would do anything with it, but make it into apartments. So, yes, we are assured of that. We have some things underneath. I'm informed that there used to be a road underneath halfway through, so there's some, I don't know, sewer laterals or things like that that are underneath that, we'll be working with the city engineers on. What do we need to do, But I don't think it's an obstacle that'll stop us.
What's your time projection?
I'm hoping that by this summer, we'll have everything, all of our plans set, finalized. Right now, the holdup is the historic designation. We're waiting for our Phase 1 on the historic. As soon as we have the Phase 1, we'll be able to go forward. It's sounding very positive. We have a consultant that we use out of Madison who is involved in the low-income housing tax credit and historic credits, and he is working with, he's working with the state historic on this. So we've got a lot of support there, too. Okay, sure.
Any other questions for Susan? Thank you. Anybody else here at the public hearing to speak to the spot blight designation at 1402 Mount Vernon? Okay, with that, I will close the public hearing with respect to that subject and move to the next item on the agenda, which is the RDA's action with respect to the request for that spot blight designation at 1402 Mount Vernon.
I don't have, can we discuss now?
We should
or
move
just
it first.
I would move it first, probably.
Now we'll move it.
Is there a
Second.
second? Moved and seconded that we approve this spot, I keep mispronouncing that, it's easy for everybody else to say, spot blight designation, and your discussion, Jason.
I have no problem with spot blighting this for the consideration that it's going to be redeveloped for positive use. My only question, and it's not necessarily maybe related to my decision because I don't think it's appropriate for the decision, but does this development create any potential density issues in that area, particular to one demographic? Meaning, the surrounding area and neighborhood, will this create negative economic density impact? Does that make sense?
Good question.
I'm wondering if there's any consideration for that, and I'm wondering if that is an issue or if that's been a discussion with the city at all.
Sharon?
I don't think we really haven't gotten to that extent yet. This is one of the first steps that Sue and company still have to come back and get land use approved through the plan development process and anything else. So at that time, we'll start to look at the density issues, things like that, because they don't have a plan for how many units they want to put in there or what we've approved yet. So that will be yet to come at future future review processes.
Thank you.
Any further questions or comments?
What is our zone? What's a zone?
C3PD.
And again, our purpose today, and this is going to be probably part of our next discussion on the agenda as well, is solely to spot blight designate this, which is, and we're the only entity of the city that can do that. Correct? Any further questions or comments? Hearing none, call the question.
Sauer,
Aye.
Hintz,
Aye.
Lasky,
Aye.
Schneider,
Aye.
Birmingham.
Aye.
Carried 5.
Okay, thank you very much. The next items on the agenda for today are really just discussion items. No voting is going to be necessary, and the first of them has to do with the possible sale of some RDA land to the city of Oshkosh for a new water tower in the Marion Road development. Alan, you want to bring us up to speed on that?
Yes, if you know the Marion Road area, there's an existing water tower. It's been there since, I believe, the 1930s. And the engineers working in Public Works are looking at a replacement tower to serve the city, especially the downtown area. and Mr. Brand and Mr. Patek have been researching the possibilities for replacing that tower. And one of the alternatives that they're asking us to consider is a portion of the RDA land that is kind of to the west of Morton, basically across from the existing water tower. Thank you, Mr. Patek. And kind of in the backyard of, or the back parking lot of AccuCom. So that's the spot that's kind of close to the existing water tower. They can explain all the details, but I think it might be the most easiest site to make the connections for the water mains connections, and then keep the water tower supplied, water pressure, water volume available during the construction as long as possible. So with that, maybe I can turn it over to Mr. Brand and Mr. Patek.
You want us to sit at the table?
The microphone, yes, that would be great.
Okay, so we had received information from Alan's department as far as what you call Lot 4, and our consultant has taken the survey information and tried to show on your survey where we would propose to locate a new water tower, and you can, I don't know if we want to bring that diagram closer. There's a, you can see that
The
lot
map in
4
your packet, if you have it, is actually, gives you
Oh,
a broader picture, and it
nice
might be
site
clearer.
plan? Okay.
Right.
Yes, perfect. So, I guess on here it's called parcel I.
Dave, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
It's the question that's going to come up down the line as the question is out there. Are there alternatives other than this general location that are potential for the location of the water tower? Because people have said, we want to get rid of the water tower, that's come to the council. Now, I understand there are some issues related to that. So could you talk about the broader issue and then bring us back to the
Sure.
specific issue of moving it over
Sure.
a few feet here? So what are the other alternatives that are realistic, or are there any realistic other alternatives?
Well, we did an analysis of keeping the tower, and Steve can chime in if I say something wrong here, but we looked at, I mean, the question came up is, do we even need the tower? And the answer is yes. So then the question would be, are there other locations? Or could, another option would be to build the tower in the same location. And so, similar to what happened with the Wisconsin Street Bridge, when if you can build in a new location adjacent to an existing facility, you can keep the existing water tower in operation, which would be much helpful for the fire department, fire flows, and that sort of thing in this downtown area. So that's why we came to Alan and said, you know, we looked right in this area because that's there's different water mains that are serving the area as far as the larger size water mains. That's why it's located at this location. The mains have all been laid out so that it can connect into the rest of the system. And the question was there a portion of, on this survey it's called Lot 4, but on this master map it's called Parcel I, and so the really the least interruption to this Lot 4 would be to the furthest north adjoining to the AccuCom parking lot.
And I want to go back just a little bit, because we're talking, that's the transition. There are two issues. There's the transition time, which clearly there's a transition issue. Then there's the 50-year, we live with it afterwards issue.
Right. Well, actually, Alan was right. It's from the 30s. So actually, we look at towers lasting about 80 years.
Probably be 100 the way
Okay.
we tend to move things, but anything more than about 20 is beyond my comprehension.
Okay.
But I'm just saying, Are there issues if it were to be moved somewhere else? I mean, outside of this location on Marion Road?
We actually looked at, as part of our Marion Road Tower study, and I wish I had the study with me now, but we looked for other areas, and there were very few areas that were even feasible. And the areas we identified in the study, and the one I can recall is actually on university property, and they already were developed at a higher value. So when you start talking about the land purchase in a developed area and possibly having to remove buildings and things, those were the kind of things we were running into. And those were based on the hydraulic analysis of the area that this tower serves as part of the hydraulic model of the distribution system, water distribution system. So there were very few areas even available, and the ones that we thought might fit the model or might be placed in were already at a higher value use than the existing area we're in now. So we were very, very limited in trying to find any sites that we could actually put this on based on how the system is laid out.
Okay, I'm sure that question will continue to be raised.
And again, with the study has very specific section and where we did look at in detail at our options.
Okay, sorry.
If costs were not an issue, is there any other alternative technology that could be considered that is less obstructive than a tower?
Well, he said
I said
if
if
cost
cost
was
is
not an
Wasn't
issue,
wasn't an issue.
we could probably
can't-
have a pumping station.
I don't know that we'd get the same effect, the same
So that's what would have to be
distribution.
analyzed.
It hadn't been studied.
Well, I
alternative
I
standpoint.
don't think we looked at it because it probably wasn't the most viable option.
You don't go to pumping if you don't have to. This is gravity pressure. We only have one pump station in the city. It's because of the topography of the city that our tower way out on Highway N serves all the property south of 20th Avenue. And that's just because that's so far away from our water plant, we couldn't get any pressure out there. So we don't want pump stations if we don't have to, because that's just an extra cost and creates a whole series of problems that we wouldn't want. But he said if we had all the money in the world, yeah, we could do, if we had all the money in the world, we could do, we'd have lots of options.
We would be turning up a lot of streets. We'd have to redo extensive parts of the distribution system because we're floating, our volume in that tower is 750,000 gallons. So we draw down during the day as it distributes throughout the system, and then we fill it at night because the cost of power is cheaper for us to fill at night. So pumping is a possibility. We'd have to model that whole thing, and I don't know that we have the proper size distribution mains to be able to get the water from the filtration plant to that location and be able to pump at the volumes necessary to spread out in that area and provide
Thank you.
the fire flows for the things.
Those are very good answers. My only other question, as it pertains to what's happening on the site, is does the cell phone equipment create an income-generating opportunity for the city?
Yes.
And does that exist today, or is this a new opportunity?
It exists today. We have it on the current tower right now.
Good.
Steve?
I think that, from a future investment possibility, that I'm less concerned about the location, more concerned about what kind of a water tower you're going to put up, the aesthetics of it there. Where are you in your thinking?
Well, and
What
we're
it's gonna
actually,
look like.
okay, so we have a committee called a stakeholders committee that's going to be meeting over the next 3 months to try to bring some consensus to what needs to be done with the water tower so that we can go to the Common Council with a consensus on how we want to build a water tower there. But really, we're limited to 3 different basic designs. We have not counting the Marion Road Tower, but if you're familiar with the Ninth and Washburn area tower, or the Highway N tower, or the tower on Furnow and Moser, that's called a,
Hydropillar.
so it's got and that's what's shown with these circles, where you have the biggest circle is the tank way up in the air, and our current tower is 175 feet tall, so that we'd be building the same height, but then the pillar is the support, covering the supports underneath, and creates an enclosure where, if you're familiar with just spheres that have just one single stem, a much smaller stem, that's the second option. Or the third option is to have a tank on top of a concrete pillar, which is called a composite tank.
So and actually, you can see the Washburn Street Tower out the window from here, so you can get an idea of a long-distance view of it. And the hydropillars generally have a larger circular base on it than the other ones. And that's, in looking at this, I understand that that's going to be one of the concerns. So, all three of those have a little different base footprints and a little different bowl footprints, which is where the water is stored up on top. So we have those three designs, which are pretty much the standard designs, and we have all kinds of flexibility within those three styles to get the feedback and find out which one is going to be most appropriate, because we're really sensitive to where this is and how it could affect the surrounding area.
So, and I'd interrupt one more time, as far as, the current style is, I don't know what they call that existing
That legged.
leg. Okay, so if you go to other communities, like I'm familiar with in the Milwaukee area, I think it's Wauwatosa, they have a very, very large tower off of Highway 41. And so they still make those leg-type structures, but only for very large tanks. So ours is only 750,000, and I thought we said the Wauwatosa or
I believe that's over 3 million. That could be 3 to 4 million
so
gallons.
people still build the leg-type structures, but we're not going to need that because we don't have the volume.
I'm glad to hear you got a committee, looking, and you're sensitive to that issue, because I think in the end, that would be the driving factor.
And we tried to include adjoining property owners. We have, there's an arts group. There are people from the chamber, from the BID, from the university. So we tried to have a good mix for those 10 participants. And the public's going to be involved as far as invited to come and listen. But really, the stakeholders are the ones that are hopefully going to make the recommendation to the council.
Council
Good
also
group.
had that discussion earlier in the game.
I see.
That's
Okay,
something
good.
Added some people.
Right.
I have a question and a comment, and I'm pretty sure the answer to my question is going to be similar to the answer I got when I suggested that we move the server room in my office building. Oh my God, the connections that we're going to have to redo to reconnect to the server is probably the answer to this question. Was there any because what I think this does from an RDA perspective is it makes our parcel L or parcel I, it puts a clunk in the middle of that may make it a problem for development, or where it's existing right now, if we ever get the Lamico property, it's kind of in the middle of that whole thing too. So I don't know that we're gaining or losing anything in terms of making the properties that we have here attractive to developers. But would it be possible to put it on the corner that I don't think anything's ever going to happen on, and that's Pearl and Jackson? It's probably a half a block, three-quarters of a block away from where it is right now.
Where the gas station was?
Used to be
at
where
that-
right. Now, there's
Well-
aesthetics aside, I can understand some people may object to that, but there's that ugly tower right across the street, so.
What you have to remember about that lot, quite a bit of that lot, if you can look at your Jackson Street width from Pearl Avenue to the south, it's been, there's been additional right-of-way dedicated to plan for a reconstruction of the Oregon-Jackson Street Bridge. So when they do that, we're anticipating that we would create a boulevard section down, and you can see that the width is only down to Pearl, but there's going to have to be a transition through that lot where you go from a 4-lane section with a boulevard to a 4-lane undivided roadway.
So your answer is, with the widening of Jackson there's probably not going to be enough
Be
room
enough
anyway.
space,
Okay.
right?
Any further questions or comments? Alan, do you have anything on this?
No, not at this point. At some point, I expect the RDA would have to take action if that proposed site is preferred based on the engineering and the input we get from the stakeholders, and put that on a future RDA agenda for actual action.
Would this be a dedication by the RDA of a chunk of that land for this water tower? And then would that be in exchange for giving the RDA back whatever real property rights the city has on the location of the existing water tower?
We anticipated, and that's a very good question, because we anticipated paying for the property, whatever you're selling your property per acre or per square foot, because we're anticipating holding that property next to the Lamico property while we figure out, we have to plan for what's going to happen in 80 years. And 80 years from now, something's going to happen where we're going to need the tower to be replaced again. And if there's some determination over the next 5 or 10 years on what happens with the Lamico property, we could do some land swaps with them, create a parcel that actually we could get out of the way for future development of Lamico, because right now we seem to be kind of in the way. I mean, there are you around us, and that doesn't seem to be real feasible for their redevelopment. So we would look at keeping our property. The utilities should pay for this acreage, and if you look on this map or this drawing, the calculation inside the red lines shows that it's approximately 14,000 square feet, or just over a third of an acre. We're showing that we would not impact the area that's shown as proposed future road, because that's another issue that has to be determined in the future as far as road alignments as other property redevelops in this area. But we would, in the short term, have a driveway that used that area to get back to Riverway, so that maintenance vehicles could use that as an access, versus we really don't want to have an impact on the Accucom, the Morton's property, and what's shown as Lot 2 here. We don't feel we're not a commercial use. We're going to be going out there to do maintenance, so our driveway should be, we thought, coming from a different direction than all those commercial vehicles or people that are using those commercial properties.
Does the city actually own, are you looking also at the piece that's in our agenda? That's a little bit of a different drawing. Does the city own the square in which the existing water tower circle is on right now?
We do.
Okay, so there's obviously some also encroachment issues there with Lamico, I presume.
Well, I think that's more of the way the GIS
Set up? Okay.
Yeah, they're not necessarily accurate the way the computer has shown all the property lines.
And then lastly, since Mike Dempsey has just walked in, has there been any discussion to make the water tower the central architectural fixture of the new bank?
They were interested in buying the naming rights.
Only put some Cabernet in there.
Okay.
On a serious note, you know, I would like it noted in the notes that for the committee to have serious consideration as to the aesthetic appeal of this, and I understand that's probably going to be part of the conversation, but to really look at the economic impact of spending the dollars to have this not look like a water tower, if at all possible. If it could look like a clock tower, I think that'd be better than a water tower. And I know that there's communities throughout the world that have done creative things with these types of things. And looking at 80 years' worth of income generated from cell phone towers may be justification to spend extra money in the aesthetic appeal as opposed to redeveloping the entire area and uprooting streets and moving the location. But I think that a combination should seriously be considered as to creating the best aspect for the community, because this is a critical area of redevelopment, and we'd like to see as much future tax income generated from this area, and that means nice developments potentially happen. So.
And if I could respond, we appreciate that comment, but unfortunately, the water utility is limited by both the Wisconsin DNR and the State of Wisconsin Public Service Commission. So we will have to do a calculation on the cost for the tower, and we are going to be getting low-interest money from the DNR to help fund the tower. So I'll just make up some numbers here, because we have I think it's $4 million in the capital improvement program.
Correct.
So we could, if the DNR says we will give you $4 million, and we say, but we need, this is a made-up number, I haven't, but we want $6 million because we want it to look like a clock, and they'll say, well, you pay your own $2, and we'll give you the $4, you come up with your own $2. But then the Public Service Commission might say, well, we don't want your ratepayers to pay that extra $2 million. We don't think that's feasible, because we have to have our rates approved by the state of Wisconsin. So I appreciate your idea, but we run into many obstacles trying to do that sort of thing. I mean, we're trying to work with the different people that have ideas. I mean, there was, I've looked on the web. There are water towers. I've found water towers that look like a corn cob, like a ketchup bottle, like a teacup, like a coffee pot. We could do many different things, but we do have to answer to those two state or commissions with our responsibility. So they're the ultimate approvers of what we do out there. So. But we know it's going to last 75 years. We want it to look good, as good as we can get it, so that's our intent.
Any further questions or comments? Thank you.
Okay,
Obviously,
thank you.
we'll be seeing this again, right? This is to begin the thought process. Next item, which again is a discussion item, has to do with an update on the proposed bank at the southwest corner of Pearl Avenue and Jackson Street. Talk to us, Alan.
Yes, the Plan Commission considered the proposed conditional use permit and plan development for the site at their earlier January meeting. Was that December or January? I think it might have. It was January. And the Plan Commission actually made two determinations. One is that the proposed bank project did not meet the Marion Road design guidelines. But number two, they recommended approval of the conditional use permit and the plan development for the site. So on one hand, the Marion Road design guidelines, their opinion was it did not meet those guidelines, which I'm told are guidelines. They haven't been adopted by the Plan Commission or the RDA or the council to actually apply. But at this point in time, we've used that in the past and to kind of gauge the development in that neighborhood. And to give you an idea, Morgan Crossing is kind of like right up to the property line, and it's 2 or 3 stories high. It has a hard edge, and there was a list of 6 criteria that you saw in the minutes that we look at the Marion Road Design Guidelines. In spite of it not meeting the design guidelines, and probably Morton Pharmacy does not meet the design guidelines, the project was still voted unanimously in favor at the Plan Commission to go to council for approval. City Council will be taking this, the conditional use permit and the plan development up at the meeting next Tuesday, the 27th. And assuming the council approves that project, then the RDA would get the development agreement and the lease agreement for the actual construction of the bank on the property at a subsequent meeting. So the update is, it's gotten to the point of going to council at this point. I expect it will be approved at council, and it will be coming back to RDA, but during that process, there were a couple of things that I was concerned we needed to talk about, which is the next agenda item. But I wanted to make sure if there were any comments from the RDA about the bank project at this point, we could at least talk about the project, since it still is the RDA land, and the RDA approved the option, which I expect the applicant to execute at the end of this month, assuming council approves it.
This may not follow the guidelines for the area, and I like how you described that as not being adopted by anybody, but what it does is there's consistency to that. There's a number of projects that haven't followed the guidelines in that area, and so that's one thing to going for this, is it's consistent in that decision-making process.
I suspect it's going to get a fair amount of discussion, I think, as it did at the Planning Commission, which was actually in December.
Yes.
Well, of course, that's been a huge argument in the architectural world for years about whether there needs to be consistency in an area or whether you should just have a collection of interesting buildings. And I'm not sure that that issue will ever be resolved.
But it'll still be discussed.
It will be discussed,
At each
yes.
and every level, because if you look
Right.
at the minutes from there was a lot of
Yes.
discussion, and then they decided to take the vote on 2 things. Is it consistent with the guidelines, or is it not? They needed a vote to decide whether or not it was consistent, if you look at it. And then they did, but then they did approve it, although I've been hearing, it sometimes happens, sometimes when people in the public, they kind of vote one way, and then they run around outside, so there's some of that going on, so. Yeah.
By
By the time these all get developed, you know, some of the new urbanism concepts may be outdated. Who knows?
That's sort of what I thought, that the big deviation from whatever that, it's not even a guideline, it's a vision, I think, is the setback, the blunt zero setback, new urbanism, sort of recreate old downtown stuff. And so that, as I see it, was the big objection that the Plan Commission had to this.
Parking in the back.
Because the
as opposed to
parking was on the
front.
street side, not on the back side of the building. Right. Okay. And I think that was responded to by the bank with a response about traffic flow in the drive-throughs, which is what drove them to do what they did. And that I understand too. So that sort of does segue back into the next item for discussion, Alan, and I think that that discussion item is about the process for RDA approvals on development projects. So is the question whether the RDA should be saying, yeah, making an economic decision or recommendation that we did when we told the bank to move forward, should that be done before it goes to Plan Commission or after? Am I reading that correctly?
Yes, and how involved does the RDA want to get in the design of any structure, from a bank to even a water tower on any land that the RDA potentially would sell?
Steve?
Well, I don't want to become a second Plan Commission. I don't think that's our role. Obviously, there are some economic questions. I mean, I think if we felt that there was something that would definitely restrict opportunities to sell land and develop land, then I think we have something to say about it. But I'm not sure we've if we were looking at this particular case, I really don't think we've reached that threshold there. That's the Plan Commission's job.
And typically, the Plan Commission has dealt with the physical development of the property. That gets reflected in the plan development with a much more elaborate site plan than the RDA certainly saw when we granted the option, where it was more of a concept plan at that point.
Right.
The engineer and the architect have worked on a site plan, and I'm sure spent thousands of dollars developing the project, so Plan Commission could see more of those details, and they'll spend more money when it comes to actually doing the stormwater engineering and the final engineering design for the whole site and the building. So there's various steps along the way that I even want to make sure that the potential applicants or the developers are treated fairly and expeditiously and not have to spend too much money too soon in the project so that we can meet their needs as much as possible as well.
That is something to consider, and is it appropriate to have any comment from the voice of the customer, the developer, as to the efficiency of the process, inefficiency of the process as it currently exists, or, I mean, is that something, I mean, us at the table, we're not our own customer, but hearing from the customer may be useful for us to consider.
Can you come up to the microphone? Either or.
I'm the architect for this particular project, working with Bank First National. And I do work on development projects with other clients. If I were to ask from the standpoint of process and order, I would say to you first, like you did, to know if it's economically appropriate for the site or property, because it doesn't take as much to prepare that information as to do some drawings and engineering and do evaluations and concepts on the property, which is where my time starts to cost the client more money. So I think the process where they came to you and you said it's what we'd like to see economically for the property in the city made sense. Again, from the procedures of steps and how much money you have to invest in that process. Now that they've done the Plan Commission and they've got a general approval on the general concept that's been submitted in some of the graphics that you saw, and now they'll go to council, and if everything approves, then they're going to spend a lot of money with us to do the rest of it. So I think the procedures that you've had seem to make sense to me as someone who sees this on multiple projects.
Good. That's helpful, thank you.
Well, and again, we're the owner of the real estate. We're the development authority, or the redevelopment authority. It seems to me that our job as a commission is limited to, does this make economic sense with the real estate that we own in the redevelopment areas that we oversee? Not where's your bush going? Not that, and I don't mean to minimize what the Plan Commission does, but not getting into the weeds. That's a bad analogy. But not getting into that level of detail. So to me, it has always made sense to say, is the concept a good one? Yes, that's RDA. Now, are the details acceptable? That's Plan Commission. And I imagine that the whole thing would end up getting hashed over at council anyway, so.
Come forth at that point.
Okay. Alan, anything further that you think we need to be aware of or consider on that?
Just as a reminder for the bank project, we are proposed, this one would be a project where they're guaranteeing a $2 million increment, which we've gotten on another project along the river, and I know the city had established that minimum value in the master development for the site, but those development value guarantees were eliminated in 2009. So that's why that would be one thing I think we need to look at very closely on future projects, is the minimum guaranteed values, because that was eliminated originally, and now I'm trying to get it back into the deals for the RDA to consider, because instead of doing a master development, these are going to be site by site, and still we need to get some minimum values established out there for the purposes of repaying the bonds and the TIF.
I think that's critical. We've had that discussion before.
And that's it I have.
Okay. Alan, you've got some items for us on your executive director's report.
Yes. With them all the way
Thank
at
you.
the end. Let's see. First item, we're working on a grant application to WEDC to help fund the downtown investment strategy. We're working on that here in January. We hope to hear the results of that grant application. Somewhere around $37,000 to $40,000 worth of grant money from WEDC to help pay for the downtown investment strategy. That's kind of the next generation of the downtown action plan that we've basically completed all the items in the action plan that the council adopted 10 or 15 years ago. So we're looking at the next generation as well as expanding that to include the South Shore and more on the North Shore of the river as well. East Central Regional Planning Commission completed their work on that riverfront visioning project, and you should have a copy of that report. And both the Plan Commission and the council have received kind of a short summary from East Central regarding the report, and you can tune into those presentations if you'd like. I didn't ask him to come back for a third time for RDA, but I could if you'd ask that. Staff is working on the Brian Burns property at 9th and Main. We're exploring alternatives for accelerating the redevelopment of that property. We expect we'll be able to bring forward some kind of recommendations in the near future, since he's behind schedule as to what was originally approved by RDA a few years ago.
Raised that question at several of the meetings. What does he say at this particular point in time?
There's been...
And talked about it, because he made several, and he's always been good in the past. And
He has been very good in the
This project
past.
has not moved along appropriately.
Correct, and I would say we haven't gotten much of a response at all to this point.
Should we ask him to come?
I do on several occasions.
Okay.
We might have to end up talking to the attorney's office to see what we can do. with any-
Is there a possibility we're going to end up with that building the way it is and nothing gets done? I'm trying to see where we're going to go on this.
I don't know if, I guess it's always a possibility
So
until it
bad,
gets
as long as we can
redeveloped.
control
but-
it back,
Increasing,
then we can do
what
something.
are we? How far behind are we now from?
Well, you know, the possibility remains that, or it could be that, as he has developed properties throughout Oshkosh, that the demand just kind of slowed down a little bit. So I suspect that, you know, because he has been just a treasure for us, and I suspect that's probably what's happened. And the same thing is true of, in fact, Mike Dempsey was here a moment ago, but he mentioned the same thing about the Pioneer property. Had the Pioneer pulled the trigger back when they did, they would have had a heck of a time, you know, because of the recession. And so, I mean, that could be the possibility. There's no sense going ahead with a development plan if you don't have a market. So,
Some of the discussion has been that he's struggling with that building.
oh, yeah,
Right.
sure.
He's struggling with the building. And this is a project that he hasn't undertaken as most entrepreneurs. The other projects were things I think he was comfortable with and he developed and he did. So
No, exactly.
this has been, and sometimes you wait for market on that. I don't think this has been as much market, although the cost has gone up, as I'm not sure that he has a concept of how he's going to do it, because it keeps,
Well, it's a little bit different than what he's done. Well, that's not completely true. He did the first Wisconsin Bank on 9th and Oregon, and he did the one a couple doors down.
If we weren't building another apartment complex on the river and talk about developing another apartment complex on the river this fall, which would indicate market, I would say that he's over his head in that building. And maybe he doesn't have enough. I think that it'd be worth a discussion to have him come in and I mean, I honestly think he owes it to us. I'm not sure what we have to get him in, what leverage we have to get him in here, but
Well, we're not
it'd
going to
really be nice to hear from
beat
him.
him up anyway. I mean,
no,
he's been-
I don't think so, because
Just to get some information.
As you pointed out, he's done great projects, he's been a great person to
Yeah,
work with, but.
absolutely.
I mean, at some time, he may have to say, this is beyond my scope.
That's right.
Well, as I recall, the last item that we had on our agenda about this was his stating his finding that the building was much farther out of square than he thought it was going to be, which made nothing viable work to, you know, in terms of doorways and windows and all that kind of stuff. And so I get that. But if it's beyond his scope, then we got to find somebody who can do it, or who wants to
I'll
do it.
figure out what we want to do with it. Okay, I just know if the discussion is worthwhile or not, or at least if you can have it to push it, because I get questions on that.
Now, okay, let's, and as far as his site is concerned, it's obviously pretty much on the corner of 9th and Main. But there's a vacant lot north of that. Is that included in that?
Yes.
All right, so, I don't know what the cost would be, but perhaps him continuing what he did, tearing that down and raising it and continuing that, that's a gorgeous, that's really attractive what he did there on 9th Street. So, but I think, I like your suggestion. I think we're friendly. I mean, it would be nice to have a conversation with him and just see what his thoughts are. It's a possibility. Maybe he's saying, I think I'm going to have to tear it down, And,
You bring up an interesting point of a vacant lot associated with that property, and is there any potential to, I know that we didn't put that in up front, but from a legal standpoint to, if you're not doing anything here, we can't just, let's take that back.
He owns all that real estate now,
Yes.
right?
Right.
So he would
Yeah.
have to be in default of something in order for us to flex muscles on that.
that's a good,
There's nothing
that's a
there,
good
yeah,
point, but I mean,
there's nothing there.
it wouldn't make any sense to develop that vacant lot and leave that other one sitting there, so.
Yeah, that-
But I think, I like your suggestion. I think it would be just to have him, he's gonna be honest and tell us where he's at, and maybe, hopefully, if we can.
Gives them an opportunity to say, I need help, or, here's my plan.
What are your thoughts on that? You've interacted more, so you guys interact more.
At this point in time, I wanted to
How
let
would
you
he
know.
react to that, too?
We're working on that right now, because we've heard you multiple times saying, where is he with that? And we're attempting to get that line established and get some kind of path forward with Mr. Burns. And at this point in time, I can't say what that path will include, because I need more input from Mr. Burns on that. But we've been patient as we can be at this point.
Well, we've been a whole lot more patient with Pioneer Inn than
Well, I'll
No,
get you
there's
that one.
different rule on that.
The Pioneer Inn
Nation's
property was
land,
never
we don't have the
ours.
same
I'm
controls
sorry,
over that.
pardon
We
me?
don't have the same controls over that. That's a whole.
Yeah, that's a little different ballgame, I guess, yeah. But,
Before we move on from this subject of, one question I have is the WEDC grant application on our downtown investment. There's a possibility of extending that as far south as 14th Avenue,
Yes,
or so says your report.
yes.
That's not all the way to, that's not like Oregon Street to 14th. That's just along South Main, I presume.
Correct.
Okay.
The final line, I don't think has been determined exactly, but
Okay.
it does include the Buckstaff property.
So if, at some point then, we're going to have to amend the boundaries of the South Shore redevelopment plan,
That's the potential, yes.
okay, and it could go as far south as the 14th Avenue entrance.
Yes. That's what made sense to
But
me.
I didn't know how far west
West
it
that
was
would
going to
go.
go. Yeah.
It kind of jogs over depending on what the condition of the properties were, and I couldn't tell you exactly what that line is right now.
Anything else on this subject, South Shore?
Let's see, we're working on a River Walk grant application for the next section there on the South Shore in the Morgan District, and we're working with the representatives there to acquire a donation for that next segment of Riverwalk as well. That'll be due here in May.
And that's Boatworks to Oregon Street, right?
That would be Boatworks to
To Oregon Street,
Yes,
okay.
because right now, the Boatworks project is funded, and the Oregon Street to the east to Dockside is funded. And as you could probably see, most of the work ended at Boatworks for the winter. They have been working on the forms for the concrete in anticipation of things warming up in the future. And we're planning on combining the Boatworks parking lot project with Riverside parking lot project later this spring to bid them together and hopefully get better costs for both the engineering and bidding, but also construction costs. So save teaming up with the transportation and parks on another project to get better bids. Let's see, Geldwin east of Oregon, we're getting close to being able to bid that out. We're doing the final design and bid documents to bid that out, and that would come back to the council sometime later this spring for construction here in 2015. And last but not least is Pioneer and Buckstaff, and did have a little information that the city attorney could share with the Pioneer. Somebody brought that up. The city did bring action against the property owner related to the condition. The property owners denied all the claims. We're proceeding with discovery. The city is attempting to schedule an inspection of the property. At this point, the property owners refused to let the city on the property, and the matter has currently been scheduled for a 3-day jury trial beginning June 29th, 2015.
Yuck.
That's the schedule.
I heard tell, and I have no idea if this is correct or not, that it is part of that action to enforce the code violation stuff that the city brought. The property owners counterclaimed with claims that the city failed to meet certain promises that they thought the city had made. Is that part of that jury trial as well, do you know?
That would be a counterclaim that I've been told they haven't filed, but could be filing in the
Okay.
near future.
Okay.
Got thrown out there. It was thrown out.
So it was a do this or we might do that kind of deal, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, you didn't do that, so we shouldn't have to do this.
Right.
And last but not least, Buckstaff, that's still in negotiations, mediation. We're still continuing to work as if we'll end up in the court process, which is still in federal court, and there is no timeline on a trial date for that particular property. And that's all I have to report.
So we just have to sit around and pay attorney's fees until those are done, right?
Multiple attorneys.
Okay. Any further questions or comments on any of our updates?
I do have a question. When does the safety issue for city trump that process for Buckstaff?
I don't
Is
know
it
if
possible?
it ever can.
Really?
It's still privately owned property. There is a process we have to follow to seize private property, to go on private property, to remove it, to demolish it. So I don't think we can, I don't know of any way you can supersede that
Okay.
process.
Well, except that I think that that's why we're there right now. I mean, we have said this place is a hazard, a fire hazard, a whatever hazard to our people, and then therefore you, property owner, must fix it. And the question is, who's the property owner, and that's
They
what's
haven't
being
decided who the
litigated.
property
Right.
owner is. Everybody denies being the property owner.
Right.
In the court system.
So until that gets
Very
resolved,
sad.
everyone's going to be pointing their fingers in opposite directions. Okay, anything else? Motion to adjourn?
Second.
Moved and seconded, all those in favor? Thank you. We are adjourned.